Good afternoon, Vernon. We'd like to wish you a happy holiday. Today, I'm with Ms. Davino, our new superintendent, and our BA, Steve Kepnes, and we come to you with a rather serious message. We've had a lot of information coming from the state about budgets in the future, and we want to talk a little bit with our community about some of those concerns that we have. We've talked about it in the past board meeting, and now we thought we'd talk directly to you.
So as Dr. McKay said in our last board meeting, which was the December 6th work session, as you know, all of our board meetings are archived on the website. So if you'd like to take a look at that meeting and hear some of the conversation, I would recommend that you do so. In the meantime, we did want to share that we received some challenges from the state of New Jersey. And Mr. Kepnes is going to speak about them in a little bit more detail. However, the general sense that we've learned is that the state of New Jersey for this budget year has decided to penalize the district. And this has happened across the state of New Jersey. We're not the only district that it's happened to. However, our district has lost a considerable amount of money. Steve, what was the number that we were that was taken away from our district?
It was just short of $1 million for this 18-19 school year.
Right, it was about $950,000.
Yes.
Right, so one of the first things that we did as a district was Mr. Kepnes appealed to the state of New Jersey and said, could you please reinstate some of those funds? And many schools around the state have done this. Very few schools have had success. In fact, when we requested to have that $950,000 put back into the Vernon Township School District funds to provide necessary programs for our students, we were told that they would not be reinstating those funds to us. And in fact, the only schools that we're aware of that have had those funds reinstated are schools who increased budgets in years past. And without getting into too much detail, basically the law indicates that the budget can go up about 2% as a 2% increase to the taxpayer each year. And I believe here in Vernon, we've had a 0% increase for the last 3 years. So based on that information is why the state did not reinstate the $950,000. And the state actually has recommended that we pass that burden, if you will, along to the taxpayers. However, before we get into that, we're going to talk a little bit about school budgeting and share some of the challenges and maybe some of the ideas that the district has in order to not pass that burden on to the taxpayers, because we certainly understand as community members, your home taxes go up each year and we don't want to be a part of that. So Steve, why don't we talk just a little bit about maybe school budgeting so that the audience can understand a little bit.
State law applies a budget formula which is based on enrollment.
Okay.
So every October 15th we count and categorize our students, and again the School Funding Reform Act, SFRA, will dictate how to formulate those numbers into actual state aid that districts should get. However, at least for the past 10 years, they haven't stuck to that formula. They've maintained this hold harmless where districts were getting what they received in prior years.
Right.
And for Vernon, that equated to about $10 million more than we would get if they used the formula.
Correct.
So recently I was given information on what Vernon's state aid would be if they just stuck to that formula, and it's about $14 million, yet we've been getting between $24 and $25 million each year.
From the state.
From the state.
Right,
so they're taking that $10 million overage that they're seeing that we've been getting, and now for over the next 6 or 7 years, they want to reduce our state aid until they get us down to that $14 million number,
right,
which they're claiming is what we should get based on the formula.
So what Mr. Kepnes is saying is that over the next 6 years or so, the district will lose that state aid incrementally each year until we reach about $9.9 million or almost $10 million. And that's a significant change in our funding. And of course, that funding pays for teacher, not just salaries and benefits, but also pays for some of the wonderful programs that we have here in Vernon. So can you talk just a little bit more maybe about how that reduction occurred, and maybe a little bit of some of the things that you shared with the board, a couple of highlights.
Sure.
From the 6th.
Sure. And the reduction in state aid, our projection, and this is coming from the state to us in terms of what percent will they reduce. So for next school year, 1920, my projection is about $1.2 million of a decrease in state aid.
Right.
Also, since we received the $1 million shortage now in this year, the board didn't reduce the spending. They are applying their own fund balance that they have to allow for the continued budget that we have today.
Right.
In the board's defense, this came at a late date.
Yes.
We did not realize its cut came until July 4th, well after we had done the budget for this year in March and April. So it was, it came out of the blue, if you will.
So in addition to the state aid decrease, the board doesn't really have that ability in 1920 to contribute out of their own funds as they have, because they spent down their fund balance. So those are two major challenges, a loss in state aid and a loss in board ability to contribute towards the budget.
So in many ways, the loss this year is a 2-year loss.
It'll probably continue beyond 2 years,
Right.
but yes.
Right. I mean, you know, it's a combined 2-year loss. And it's very important to note that the buy down on this is front loaded. So while it's 6 years, the first 4 years are really harsh. The cuts are really harsh.
Yes.
In terms of state aid, the projection is $1.2 million loss for next year. Almost $2 million the following year, and then in year 3 we're pushing $2.5 million.
Right. So those are the real concerns. It's the next 3 budgets.
Right. So when you think about that kind of challenge being posed to district leadership, myself as the superintendent, Chuck as the assistant superintendent, and Steve as the business administrator, it was really important for us to present some of this information to the board on December 6th. And that was a work session discussion. Like I said, it's archived if you'd like to take a look at it. In addition, one of the things we'd like to do is probably in January and February, we'll be opening up some open forums, special public meetings, so that parents and community members and stakeholders can come and speak to us. Those dates have not been set yet. They will most likely be going out in a superintendent's newsletter that I will release just before the holidays. One of the things that's really important for you to understand, as challenging as this may be, is that when we have a loss of state aid of such magnitude, there are very few places where those reductions can occur. Unfortunately, salaries and benefits take up a very large portion of the budget, maybe 75, 80%.
Exactly.
So that takes up quite a bit of our school budget. We don't want to impact school programs. The things we have for our students here are absolutely second to none. I thought so highly and still think highly of the CTE programs. It's one of the reasons I came here to Vernon.
programs.
As well as the amazing things that our teachers do for our students each day.
Absolutely.
So without speaking for the board, I think it's important for you to take a look at the December 6th meeting. There was some conversation about, looking at some cuts as well as balancing that with some increase. Again, for our viewers, we don't know what that's going to look like yet, and those are things we'd like to hear more about from our stakeholders sometime in January and February.
When our community was going through the security ideas that we were presenting a year ago, we had 2 community outpourings, and people came out and discussed how they felt about having armed guards in the school. We are hoping that we have that kind of
Very
discussion
similar.
or that kind of concern coming out from the community, so we get a sense of what people feel is important for this budget and the next 2 or 3 budgets, so that we can hear everyone's voices. So it's crucial that we get the community out in January and February to discuss these issues.
And it's also to provide transparency. The reality is that we don't want families to be caught unaware.
Absolutely.
Either with an increase in a tax bill or with potential cuts that may happen here in the district. So the goal of the administration as well as of the board is to try to keep that information forthcoming so that as taxpayers and as parents and stakeholders, you truly understand what's happening here in the district, and it allows you to be a little bit more involved and to share the things like Dr. McKay said with us, so that when it comes down, unfortunately, to make cuts, that we're drawing upon as much information as possible. And I think we have some more information in some future podcasts. I believe we're going to link up maybe some of Dr. Kepnes's presentation that he did on December 6th.
Yep.
And that's something that hopefully you'll take a look at. And on behalf of everyone here in the office, have a very wonderful holiday.
Hello, I'd like to take some time and go through a projection of the Vernon Board of Education's decrease in state aid and projected budget for the 1920 school year. As you can see on the agenda, we'll first start by talking about the state aid, so let's get to it. This is one of the many pages that we receive from the state aid formula from the state, and the number there, the 13.9 million, is the number that they want to work us down towards, because based on their calculation, that's the amount of state aid we should be receiving. If you look just above it, the 24,000,004, two numbers above it, that's approximately what we're getting now. So you can see it's almost a $10 million change if they were to actually apply the formula. And over to the bottom right, for this current school year, they've already reduced us by almost $1 million. You'll see that negative 995,554. That's a decrease in state aid that we received for this current school year, the 18-19 school year. The $13,000,009 that you'll see being pointed at by the red arrow is what they want to work us down towards. And the $23,000,009 to the left of it is what we're currently getting. So you can see it's $9,970,000 more than the uncapped aid that the state claims we should be getting. So over time, they're going to be reducing our state aid by $9,970,000. The first year going into next school year, they're going to reduce by 13% of that. So our projection for next year is approximately a 1.2. You'll see the $1,296,000, the $1.2 million decrease. And then as we look at subsequent years, over to the right, you can see the changes that we will be projecting to have, the $1,009,000 in 2021. You'll see $2,471,000 as a decrease in this next year, and you can see the remaining decreases that we're projected to have until eventually they will have reduced us by a full almost $10 million. First challenge is that state aid reduction next year of about $1.2 million. Another challenge, since they reduced the board's aid by almost $1 million this year, the board is replacing that with their own fund balance. They're ultimately spending their own funds to get through this school year. So the board will deplete much of their own funding, their own fund balance, and will not have the ability to support the 1920 budget as they've done in the past. For this current school year, the board is contributing $1.7 million of its own fund balance. For next school year, they'll only be able to afford $361,000. So you can see the difference in the board's ability to support their own budget. We're going to have a shortfall of $1.4 million. So I see that as another challenge that I'll put up to the top of the screen. And lastly, this is a gross projection. That number that you see, the $66 million, is our current budget. Assuming, and that's a great assumption, assuming that spending increases by about 2%. That would be about $1.2 million. So in addition to the shortfalls in those revenues, the shortfall in the state aid up top and a shortfall in the fund balance, we also project if we kept this budget flat, kept everything in the budget that is currently in the budget, we would have to increase our spending, and that becomes a third challenge. So now you see those three challenges. And if we add up all of that in terms of challenge, you can see the total challenge is $3.9 million, which is a combination of having to make up revenues and having a greater budget or spending, if you will. So we have some work cut out for us to balance this. This is the tax levy trend over the past several years. And just to show you, the board has been proud to keep the tax levy at bay. It's been on the decline from your school tax. For example, you'll see the largest decrease from the 15-16 year going down to the 16-17 year. You'll see it dropped way off. So they actually lowered the tax levy, school tax, for that school year. And I want to briefly talk about what boards can do with tax levy. As that year went way down, the boards of education are allowed to increase their levy by 2%. So if you take that decline in the 16-17 school year and try to envision where that could have gone had it increased by 2%, you can see it's well under the amount that it could have gone. And the state allows boards of ed to ultimately have the authority to raise taxes in a subsequent year by the amount of the underage, if you will, of 2%. And I'm going to come back to that right now. For example, this is your tax levy, $38 million. If we increase it by 2%, which is the state's cap, that allows us to increase the levy by $764,000. And up at the top, the 3,000,009 represents that total challenge that we talked about. So by raising the levy by the 2%, we still need $3,154,000 to balance the budget. So the question is, where does that revenue come from? And the state has implemented years ago something called cap banking eligibility. Ultimately, it allows, if boards of ed budgeted their levy under 2%, it takes that difference, under 2%, and allows them to apply it to a subsequent year. So let me take the bottom 2 rows of this chart and blow them up so we can talk about them. In the 16-17 year, we were under the 2% cap by $2,600,000. In 17-18, we were under by $546,000. And you can see the number in the 18-19. So the sum of those is a total of $3,627,030. That is, the board has the authority to ultimately raise taxes in a subsequent year by that amount. Now, up at the top right corner of the screen, if we want to get to the $3,154,000, we would need to use the full $2,638,000 in addition to $516,000. The sum of those would give us the amount in red up top to still need $3,154,000. So applying those, that reduces it. And then when we roll into the next year, this screen, everything shifts to the next year. And you can see at the bottom right in 1920, we would only have the $472,000 to apply in any subsequent year, or the 2021 year, which will represent a hardship because we'll have applied so much to the 1920 year. So we have our current levy. We then have the amount that we will have raised, keeping the budget flat, if you will. So the new levy would be $42 million, which would represent a 10.25% increase, applying those challenges that we talked about. And here's the tax impact. If I take that increase, for every $1 million of assessed value in Vernon, you can see the increase at the bottom would be about $81 per $1 million. But we have more than $1 million. We have $3.9 million over there. So if we take the 3.9 times the 81, the average home being $214,000, would generate an increase in their school tax by $317 if we applied that full challenge amount to the levy increase. Future outlook. You can see if we took that $42 million in 1920, if we applied a 2% increase, $842,000, and applied that banked cap that we had remaining, the total change over to the right would be an increase in $1.3 million. However, the state aid, based on the projected reductions, would come down $1.9 million. So you can still see we have a shortfall for the 2021 school year, which is, again, another challenge that the board will have to face, depending how they handle this 1920 budget. And that was the discussion. If you want to go to our website, you can see the December 6th discussion that the board had regarding this presentation. And thank you for listening.